It's 2 in the afternoon on Wednesday, August 27th, here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Now, these are the stories we are following at this hour. Intelligence officials in Washington reportedly suspect that North Korea is building a submarine capable of targeting U.S. bases in Alaska and Guam with ballistic missiles. Consumer sentiment rebounds to nearly the same level seen before April's ferry sinking. The central bank attributes the rise to government stimulus measures. And in the Gaza Strip, Israel and Hamas are finally able to agree to an indefinite ceasefire, putting an end to a 7-week conflict that killed more than 2,000 people. And we begin with a report coming out of the U.S. American intelligence agencies reportedly have grave suspicions that North Korea is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. Now, this adds to existing concerns about the missile and nuclear threat posed by the regime. Our Shin Se-min starts us off.
You're looking at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un sitting atop of a Romeo-class submarine. The photos of Kim surfaced in June when he visited a naval unit of the Korean People's Army and, according to North Korean state media, conducted a drill and instructed the captain on navigation methods. His visit is part of North Korea's efforts to shore up the underwater operation capability of its submarines. And it seems the North is making inroads. U.S.-based media outlet Washington Free Beacon reports that U.S. defense intelligence agencies recently detected a previously unseen missile launch tube on a North Korean submarine. North Korea is reportedly developing a ballistic missile submarine that, if confirmed to be true, would significantly raise the threat posed by the nuclear-armed communist state. According to the report, U.S. intelligence shows Pyongyang is developing a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. North Korea is also believed to have already obtained submarine-launched ballistic missiles from Russia. Pentagon spokesman Jeffrey Poole refused to comment on the report, saying he was not allowed to discuss matters of national intelligence. However, he did say the U.S. urges Pyongyang to be more transparent with its defense activities for the sake of regional peace. If the report is true and Pyongyang has developed its capability, the U.S. will have to look into strengthening its missile defense systems on the West Coast, as North Korea would be capable of hitting Alaska. U.S. bases in Japan, the Philippines, and Guam would also be well within range of a North Korean strike launch from waters in Asia. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And turning now to the torrential downpours in southeastern Korea earlier this week, the death toll has risen to 12 with the discovery of 4 more bodies in Changwon, Gyeongsangnam-do province this Wednesday morning. All those found were passengers on an intercity bus that was swept away by fast-moving currents on Monday. Search operations continue for 2 people who remain missing in the disaster, while rail services are gradually starting to resume normal operations in the area. Now, all of this as more than 240 millimeters of rain fell in the southeast of the country on Monday in just about 3 hours, leading to landslides and flash flooding. Now, the floor leadership of the ruling Saenuri Party will hold a second round of meeting with the bereaved families of April's ferry sinking on this Wednesday. The meeting is, of course, about a legislation that will set up the details of a special counsel investigation into the accident. The two sides are expected to focus especially on whether to give the families more say in selecting the list of candidates to lead the investigation. The ruling party has so far rejected the families' demand of having the authority to select related personnel. The passage of the special bill has been stuck in political limbo for more than 3 months now, holding up a slew of other pending bills. On the economic front, the Korean economy appears to be on its way toward recovery, rebounding from the impact of April's ferry disaster. The index that measures the overall economic outlook of consumers has improved this month, inching closer to the level seen just before the accident. Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
The Bank of Korea says the Consumer Sentiment Index stood at 107 in August, up 2 points from a month earlier. The figure marks a rebound from July, suggesting that Korean consumers might be returning to the spending habits that were dented after April's ferry disaster. The index hovered at around the 108 level in the first 4 months of this year, but dropped to 105 in May following the disaster. The central bank says the improvement was spurred by a widely expected rate cut this month and government stimulus measures that were instituted by an economic team that took office last month. While indications are that consumer sentiment is improving, the August figure is still below the level posted before the ferry tragedy. A new survey from the central bank shows that more than 9 out of 10 companies in the service sector expect the negative impacts of the ferry tragedy to last at least until next month. The monthly index is a gauge of the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. A reading over 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. 황지혜, 아리랑 뉴스.
And a chronic obstacle facing Korean society is its rapidly aging population. To provide a stronger safety net for the growing number of elderly, the government will obligate all companies in the nation to offer their employees private retirement plans in 8 years' time. That's part of the plan announced by Finance Minister Changhoon following an economic ministerial meeting today. By 2016, all companies with 300 or more employees would be required to subscribe to a retirement pension program, and by 2022, the provisions would extend to all companies regardless of size. Minister Che said the government would also ease current regulations on retirement pension funds to improve the firm's operating profitability. And adding to the concerns of the aging population is the nation's low birth rate. The problem is worsening by the year, and experts say Korea's super low birth rate will inevitably impact the labor force that could severely limit room for economic growth. Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
It's becoming harder to hear the crying of newborns in Korea. The nation's birth rate has been on a steady decline over the past 40 years. Currently, it has the lowest birth rate among the 34 OECD member countries. Last year, the number of newborns stood at 436,500, a near 10% decrease from 2012. This means about 8.6 babies were born among a population of 1,000, the lowest since the year 1970, when the government first began recording population data. The age of pregnant mothers, meanwhile, is getting higher, which is one of the main contributing factors for the country's low birth numbers. Last year, the average age of mothers who gave birth was 31.8 years old, 0.2 year older than the previous year. 1 in 5 of them were aged 35 or older. The Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs says the low birth rate trend will affect the labor force in the long run. The number of able workers between the ages of 15 to 64 is estimated to stand at 37.2 million in 2016 and is expected to steadily decrease to less than 9.5 million people by the year 2100.
The country's labor productivity will greatly fall with the growing rise of the aging labor population, as there are less newcomers joining the workforce.
The researcher emphasized the need to come up with comprehensive measures to ease the burdens families face when raising children, particularly policies that would help parents balance work and family life. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea has many nicknames, one of them being a coffee republic. You are bound to see at least 1 or 2 coffee shops within every block in Seoul, and there's a high chance that it's a Starbucks. The only downside for the consumers is the price, but as our Connie Kim reports, Koreans seem to be willing to pay the extra price.
If you need evidence to support the notion that Korea is crazy for coffee, you only need to look around the streets of Seoul, where a coffee shop can be found on just about every corner. But none have quite the presence that Starbucks has. There are 284 Starbucks coffee shops located in Seoul. Now that's more than you'll find in New York City, Shanghai, London, or Seattle, where the company was founded. Koreans are also paying more for a cup of joe at the chain, $4.85. That's how much Starbucks Korea charges their customers for an average cup of coffee. That's nearly twice as much as customers in the United States pay. For an Americano, the data shows that Korea ranks 6th on the list, behind countries like Poland and Greece. Despite the steep prices, Starbucks customers here in Korea say they're happy to pay.
Starbucks has been in Korea for ages, so I trust them. There are a lot of Starbucks, so they are easy to find. I'd like to know why the prices keep going up, but I'll continue going.
It appears that Koreans, generally speaking, are willing to shell out a little extra for a cup of coffee, no matter where it comes from. Starbucks prices are right on average with the prices found at domestic coffee chains. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
In the year 2012 for Korea was at its record high.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul.
Shopping market thinks the true meaning of creation shines through. After some 8 ceasefire deals in a 50-day war, Israel and Hamas have agreed on an indefinite truce. It will allow Palestinians in Gaza to begin rebuilding as leaders from all sides prepare to return to Cairo to work out a permanent truce. Son Jung-in reports.
The long-term truce was announced Tuesday after Israel and Hamas agreed to halt fighting indefinitely, bringing an end to 7 weeks of conflict. The truce brokered by the Egyptian government was reached after 2 days of extensive negotiations in Cairo. The terms of the deal appeared to be almost the same as the one proffered at the beginning of the conflict, easing the blockage of Gaza to allow relief supplies and reconstruction materials to pass through. It also extends the fishing limit to 6 nautical miles from 3 nautical miles. Joyful Palestinians poured into the streets to celebrate. However, fighting continued right up until the truce was declared, with 1 Israeli killed and several injured, according to its officials, while in Gaza, 2 Palestinian children were reportedly killed in an airstrike. Both sides will likely return to Cairo sometime within the next month to address more contentious issues, including Israel's call for militant groups to disarm and Hamas' demands for an airport and seaport in Gaza and the release of Palestinian prisoners. The ceasefire follows at least 8 temporary truces during the course of the conflict that began on July 8th. More than 2,200 people were killed and tens of thousands were left homeless, mostly in Gaza. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
A United Nations cargo helicopter has been shot down in rural South Sudan, killing 3 people on board. The UN says the crew were Russian contractors. The chopper crashed near Bentiu, a hotly contested region where government and rebel forces have been fighting since December. The unrest had displaced some 1.8 million people who were receiving food aid from the UN. Now, the spokesman for a state governor said a rebel commander had warned the UN not to fly over that territory last week. The incident came 1 day after the 2 sides agreed to work toward a permanent ceasefire and form a national unity government within 45 days. In other news, you'd normally assume that electronic cigarettes are less harmful than conventional ones, but the jury's still out on whether they actually are. The World Health Organization has called for stricter measures on e-cigarettes, warning they could pose a health threat. Our Kim Min-ji has the story.
More and more people these days are reaching for electronic cigarettes as a way to quit smoking.
If you use electric cigarettes, you will smoke less tobacco.
Although potentially less harmful than traditional cigarettes, there are mounting concerns regarding the health risks of e-cigarettes. And the World Health Organization has drawn up a report calling for stricter regulations. It calls for the prohibition on e-cigarette manufacturers from making unproven health claims, such as they help people quit smoking, until there is convincing scientific evidence to support them. The WHO also urges a ban on the use of e-cigarettes in public places until it is proven that exhaled vapor is not harmful to bystanders. The report also says fruit, candy, or alcoholic drink-style flavors should be prohibited until evidence shows that they're not attractive to teenagers. The report warned that exhaled e-cigarette vapor could increase the levels of toxins and nicotine in the background air and pose a greater threat to teenagers and the fetuses of pregnant women who use the device.
Underlying reasons for regulation are really to impede then the promotion of these products to non-smokers and youth.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a separate report saying that teenagers that have used e-cigarettes were more likely to smoke real cigarettes. The WHO will hold the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in October and discuss the issue with member states. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And on to some tech news. Chinese manufacturers have recently been loosening Korea's tight grip on the smartphone market, but apparently it's not just smartphones. Research firm Display Search says 3 Chinese television manufacturers, including Xiaomi and Lenovo, recently released products at extremely low price, some up to 30% cheaper than similar ones on the market. Now, Xiaomi, for example, is selling a 49-inch ultra-high-definition TV for around $650 US. That's about 4 times lower than similar class models offered by Korea's tech giant Samsung. The latest discovery of nearly 80 Buddhist artifacts on the outskirts of Seoul was revealed to the public last week. They are among some of the finest preserved and historically important pieces related to Northeast Asian Buddhism. Our Song Ji-sun has this story.
At the entrance of a trail leading to summit of Dobongsan Mountain in northern Seoul sits Dobong-seowon. During Korea's Joseon dynasty, which spanned more than 500 years until the late 19th century, Dobong-seowon acted as an institute for educating young scholars and remembering historic ones. This particular institute was dedicated to Jo Gwang-jo, a Confucian scholar who pursued radical reforms in the early 16th century. But recent discoveries at the site have people, historians in particular, looking even further back to the Goryeo dynasty, which ruled most of the Korean peninsula between the 10th and 14th century. A total of 77 Buddhist artifacts from the Goryeo era have been discovered here at Dobong-seowon, a site that functioned as a Confucian academy during the Joseon dynasty. The site, currently being restored, is set to be reopened next year. Among the dozens of artifacts excavated, one very sophisticated piece that's unique to the Goryeo era stands out. It's this Keungangnyang, a bell used in Buddhist ceremonies during prayer chants. It's the first known piece in which the 4 heavenly guardians and the 5 great kings are engraved on one instrument, a first not just in Korea, but in other Northeast Asian countries where Buddhism has roots. Although these artifacts were found at an institute that was used during the Joseon dynasty, at a time when Buddhism was suppressed to foster Confucianism, they were not hidden or destroyed.
Before transforming into an institute, the site was used as a temple in the Goryeo era. It is assumed that these artifacts were buried as part of a ceremony to pay respect to the Buddha. These were found inside these larger pots, which helped to preserve their original shapes and materials relatively well.
The preliminary report on these artifacts will now be handed over to art historians, who will conduct further studies and look for clues about Buddhist practices during the Goryeo era. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
And now on to another arts and culture item. If you are an avid fan of classical music, you would have heard of Korean conductor Chung Myung-hoon. Now, he is a legendary figure who had garnered media attention from a very young age. Our Im Yoon-hee is here today to tell us a bit more about Maestro Chung. Good afternoon, Yoon-hee.
Good afternoon. Right, so Chung Myung-hoon is an award-winning conductor as well as a musician, and so he has quite the career accomplished. And so he's also the first to do many things, including the first to be named the Korea cultural ambassador for Korea. And so it looks like he's not slowing down anytime soon. Take a look.
Maestro Changhoon is considered Korea's most famous conductor and has garnered world-class status over the years, performing with some of the top orchestras around the globe. He began playing instruments at the age of 5 and made his debut just 2 years down the road with the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra. And over 50 years later, in 2006, he's made his way back to the Seoul Philharmonic as their artistic director and conductor. He and the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra will be making their BBC Proms debut later today. And if he wasn't busy enough, Chung decided to go back to the piano, the instrument that started it all. Last year, he released his first piano solo album called Changmyeong-hoon Piano, which is a short compilation of well-known pieces, including Mozart's variation of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and Beethoven's For Elise. He's called it a lighthearted project, and this year he's set to perform some of the more complicated pieces on his first ever solo piano tour. He'll travel around the country in October for a total of 5 performances that will consist of all 4 Chopin ballads, Brahms' 4 pieces for piano opus 119, along with some other classical masterpieces.
And it's not just him, though. The whole family has great musical talents,
Right.
and they had formed what was called the Chung Trio as well.
The siblings. But, you know, he started conducting in 1979, and so since then he's led very many internationally renowned opera groups, theaters, and orchestras, including the Opera Bastille, Radio France, Berlin Philharmonic, the Vienna Philharmonic, and London Symphony, just to name a few. So quite the accomplishments there as a conductor. You know, so the Seoul Philharmonic is very, very fortunate to have him there with these years of experience to offer.
And what motivated him then to get back to his roots of playing the piano?
Right. So he said in multiple interviews that he always wanted to go back to creating his own music. And so he said when he turned 60, when he was younger, he said, when I turn 60, I want to go back to creating my own music. And he turned 60 last year. And so he wanted to go back to his roots. And he did obviously go back to playing the piano. And now he is performing the piano in solo recitals. So people are very excited about that.
So after he comes back from the Seoul Philharmonic European tour, and then he's going to have his recitals. But in between, he has other schedules as well?
Yes, he's very, very, very busy. So
yeah, I can imagine.
September 10th, he's keeping himself busy. September 10th, he is planning on leading a concert with the Asia Philharmonic Orchestra. Now, the APO is a group he created in 1997. He founded using some very world-renowned members from 20 of Asia's top orchestras. And so a very accomplished group. So he's going to be leading them both as a conductor and on the piano as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Yuni, for the story today.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather update. Today we can finally expect a break from the rain here in Seoul, and we are looking at a cloudy day with hotter temperatures compared to the last few days. But we are not completely out of the woods, and more rain is in the forecast in the southern regions. In fact, on and off showers will be seen throughout the entire day, and to the evening up to 30 millimeters are expected down south and 60 on Jeju Island. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out this afternoon at 30 degrees. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will top out at 28 and 26 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 26 as well, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang both tops to the low 20s. Now that's all for now. Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's the end of our newscast. Thank you for staying with us. I'll be back with more at 4 p.m. Korea time.